couple of months ago I did a review video of some circular filters for landscape photography. They happened to be magnetic, but they were still circular, and I was pretty impressed with them. Fast forward to just a couple of weeks ago and suddenly I'm using my old square filter system. So what's going on? Which is best, the square filters or the round? Well, in my opinion, for what it's worth, I think there are advantages to both systems. So I thought I'd do a little video setting out my thoughts on that. I hope you'll enjoy it. If you do and you're new here, don't forget to hit subscribe before you go. Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. So let's start out by talking about the advantages of the circular filter system. And I think the first thing we can talk about is size. The circular filter system takes up a lot less space in the camera bag. Admittedly, there are more filters in this square filter system than in here, but nevertheless it's a significant difference in size and, yes, in weight as well. So that's definitely one advantage to these. Another advantage is, generally speaking, buying circular filters is going to be cheaper than buying a square filter system. Assuming you go for the slightly pragmatic approach, which is buying the filters that fit your largest diameter lens and then using something like step-up rings to fit those to the smaller diameter lenses. It's a very cost-effective way of working, although to be fair, you do just have to be careful using step-up rings with very wide-angle lenses, because it can increase the chances of getting vignetting as the filters basically start to get into the frame. The third advantage to these, well, they don't actually massively increase the surface area at the front of the lens. Now that may not seem that important, but if you're photographing in windy conditions, if you've got a big flat glass or plastic area on the front of the lens for the wind to bash into, it can certainly result in an increased chance of vibration making it through and potentially spoiling the image. And the same thing kind of applies a little bit to shooting when you've got spray or even rain, because it's actually easier in many ways to protect that smaller circular filter from spray and rain until you're ready to shoot than it is the big flat surface of the square filters. And the square filters, because they go into slots, there's also a possibility that spray or rain can get down behind the filters, and then you might not even see that you've got water on there to ruin the image. Okay, so what's the advantage of using the square filters? Why would you want to? Well, for me, the biggest single advantage to square filters is the ability to use grads. Graduated filters can be used to darken one part of the scene, typically the sky, when you've got one area that's much brighter than another. In other words, exceeding the camera's ability to correctly expose both the darker part of the scene and the brighter part of the scene. There is an argument that says you don't really need graduated filters, because it's very easy to take two shots, one for the darker part of the scene and one for the brighter part of the scene, and then just bring them together in something like Photoshop. And that's true, it is very easy, and I've done that on lots of occasions. But there are times when it's nice to just be able to see what that image is going to look like on the camera while you're in the field, to see if you need to adjust it or make some minor changes based upon the way the light is actually working. But where grads really come in useful is if you're doing long exposure photography. At the moment I've got a 10 stop ND filter and a 2-stop hard-edged ND grad in, just to let me balance the exposure nicely. So I'm actually shooting a 4-minute exposure here. Yeah, cool. Now I could have taken a 4-minute exposure for the foreground and then taken a 2 stops darker exposure for the sky, either by making a much shorter exposure, say 1 minute, but then it wouldn't have had quite the same long exposure effect on the sky, or by changing my aperture, making it much smaller, so going to something like f22, and doing another 4-minute exposure for the sky, which would have had the same long exposure effect, but would of course meant that my 4-minute exposure was now taking me at least 8 minutes to complete, because obviously there's some time changing the settings between the 2 exposures. So I think that's where ND grads or graduated filters really come in useful. Actually, there's another little tip or another little trick you can do with grads, because they can actually serve 2 purposes. If you've got hard-edged grads, you can actually put them in so that they cover the dark part covers the entire surface of the lens, and it just becomes another ND filter. So if I want a 2-stop or a 3-stop filter, instead of buying a 2-stop ND filter or a 3-stop ND filter, I can just pop in an ND grad, a hard-edged ND grad, and I normally put them in upside down when I do it, and use it to block off the entire scene and just work as a lower strength ND filter. Okay, so that's my views on the advantages of circular filters and square filters. So which ones am I going to be using in the future? Well, both. If I'm doing a long hike in the mountains where space in my camera bag and the weight that I'm carrying is at a premium, and where, to be honest, I'm unlikely to really need to use graduated filters, I'm going to take the circular filter system. It's small, light, and will do everything that I want. If I'm out doing photography on the coast where I might want to do long exposures, where I'm likely to have a very bright sky and a darker foreground, particularly perhaps around sunrise, then I'm going to take the square filter system. That's it. That's my thoughts on the topic. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'd love to know what you think. Do you use circular filters? Do you use square filters? Do you have a preference? Have you got some questions about either solution? I'd love to hear from you. Let me know what you think. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share it on social media. Don't forget about leaving me that comment or question or whatever you like. If you're new here and you've enjoyed this, don't forget to hit subscribe before you go. And as always, I really appreciate you taking the time to watch, so thank you very much. And until the next video, bye.